Thank you to Sasnet, thank you to Lund University, thank you to Thalat, and thank you to everyone else for inviting me here to speak. First thing, let me clarify very much. I'm not Kashmiri. I'm not from Kashmir. In fact, if anything, part of my identity is related to one of the occupier, which is India. So I thought I'll clarify. So when I talk of Kashmir, I don't talk in the name of anyone as such. So I'm not speaking for anyone. So I'm not presenting any particular Kashmiri or any other perspective. But I mean, going back to the movie, so the idea was we show the movie so that we see a particular case of one man, his ideology, and also what the Indian state did. So when you asked, I mean, whether the body, bureaucracy is very complicated over life and death both, right? So for instance, if one is buried in one place, they can't be moved to another place. It becomes very tricky. But in this context, the idea was, as you pointed out, that normally the family has at least the right to see the body. In this case, they had no such right, or rather, they were denied that right. And Maqbul Bhat is not the only one. Right? But Kashmir in general, I mean, when you speak to Indians, they'll talk of Kashmir as a beautiful place with beautiful people, or occasionally beautiful place with nasty people. So place is beautiful, no doubt, right? But the idea is people are not good because they're traitorous. They don't really respect India. They don't recognize that India is a great democracy. Why don't they recognize? Because they are fooled by Pakistanis or they are Muslims. So Islamophobia and Pakistan phobia both come into play in denying Kashmiri any political agency. Now this image, of course, these are both taken by me. These kids, again, a lot of images you'll find old ones where they show nice kids and happy kids. The only thing I'll remind you of that these kids are from family that's victim of enforced disappearance. Around 8 to 10,000 Kashmiris have been forcibly disappeared by the state since 1990, which implies that they're not killed. We don't know, they might have been killed, but they're disappeared. So with killing, you know, the body is there. Tortured, you know, the body is there. With disappeared, there is no body. So you have a phenomenon where kids are orphaned, but they're not orphaned. You have women who are called half widows because they don't know whether they're widows or not. Now, in particular, you can imagine that if you have to bear that psychological pressure for 20 to 25 years, it's not going to be easy, right? So I thought I'll start with these images that on surface could look at beauty and nice and charming, but reality is quite different. Again, giving a two example, Parveena Ahangar, she is one of the first victims of enforced disappearance. Her son was disappeared, 15-year-old kid who was disappeared, and she had been struggling for justice for her son and for 8 to 10,000 other people since 1990. Only thing I'll tell you that what's the hope of anything happening is not a single case. So Indian government Indian courts have refused to punish a single person so far since 1990. It's that clear. So what hope lies? I mean, what hope lies for mother, Maqbul Bhat's mother, to get her body back? If you ask me, I don't think there's hope till India exists as an occupying country, which it does. Now, international community will come later, where what its role could be. And this kid, again, I met, in fact, I was sort of inspired to focus more on Kashmir. My work initially was on Tibet, another stateless nation. And we're talking of Middle East center here, and we can think of the largest stateless nation in the world, the Kurds, right? So my interest is largest stateless nation, and that's how I came to Kashmir. This kid, he lost his eye, one of his eye, through pellet injury. Now, pellet injuries or pellets are seen as non-lethal way of policing in India. The only thing is, you have got hundreds of kids who have lost eyesight or who have been maimed because of pellets. But at least one could say they have not been killed so far. That's how our Indian government will represent it. So the idea is, when we look at Kashmir, it should be very clear that I'll explain the historical background. I think that we are talking here of territory controlled by two states, but we are primarily talking of a people occupied by two states. And therefore, I don't use the Indian side, Pakistan side, Indian administered, Pakistan administered. I could, but it's very clear we are talking of occupation. So Indian occupied and Pakistan occupied. The story is very simple. Generally, when you read international academics, or for that matter, Indian and Pakistani strategic thinkers, I'm clear, right? I'm clear, okay. You see it in terms of India-Pakistan. So Kashmir is always presented as a dispute between India and Pakistan. So India claims, as Talat pointed out, that India is a secular state. So the argument that Kashmir should be Pakistan because of Muslim majority doesn't hold true, because India is secular. And Pakistan's entire basis was in Hindus and Muslims are distinct nation, and hence, in order to justify Pakistan, they need Kashmir. So it's about territorial conflict, and you can see a line, and it's a disputed line, of course, because both states refuse to recognize it. Now, the interesting part with this line, it looks neat here. It's not that neat on the ground, historically. And second thing is that we are talking of, so it looks, it is today, the boundary, right? So it looks very heavily militarized. So at least those who fetishize military and clear boundaries would think at least headache is not there, you have clear militarization. But the reality is, every couple of months, you're firing from both sides. Indian media, supposedly democratic media, right, free speech and everything, they always say Pakistan fired. And Pakistani media again also says India fired. Now, in today's world, okay, 30 years ago you could imagine that how could Indian newspaper find out what Pakistanis are saying, right? It could be difficult. But today there's no such excuse. And yet, I haven't come across a single news item in Indian media or Pakistan media that actually tries to balance or give both sides. They take sides very clearly and say, oh, Indians are victims or Pakistanis are victims. You end up in a situation where cattle, and this is a cattle of course, whether Indian cattle or Pakistani cattle shouldn't matter, but sometimes they do say, oh, it's a Pakistani pigeon coming into India. Oh, it's real. Few months ago, Pakistani pigeon was arrested in India because they felt that it was spying. Now this is, I think this buffalo is Indian, because I saw it from a website which is Indian newspaper, so saying how a buffalo is being harmed. Okay? Now, of course, these are firing on all sides, but people get killed. Soldiers get killed, but mostly civilians who get killed. Now one could argue, but why do civilians live there? Because they have always lived there. So what happens is, in 1947, when India gets divided, when British leave India and India gets divided into India and Pakistan, you have a situation of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir that remains independent. Now, they're not given the option of independence, so they're forced to choose between India and Pakistan. Both India and Pakistan want the state to join them. And the ruler, who's Hindu ruler in Muslim majority, is undecided.
Like Western Muslim, Baloch.
Baloch, more like Baloch. Less than Punjab, but more like Baloch. So very much like Baloch situation, like Khan of Kalat having to make decision, or like Tibetans, right? So they're similar situation. So what happens is, the different stories, as you can imagine, different narratives on this, but broadly the Indian argument is that there was an invasion of tribals, Pashtun tribals, from Pakistan into Kashmir. The status quo was changed, and the Kashmiri ruler, Hindu ruler, invited Indian army to come in and help him. But the only way in which India would help is if the ruler signed an instrument of accession, joining India. The Pakistani version is that the tribal invasion was spontaneous because Muslims were suffering, right? And second, that there was already a genocide of Muslims going on in Jammu, another area of Jammu and Kashmir, and where a lot of people had been excluded, and therefore it was something internal, where Pakistan had only role of a neutral actor. So these are two versions. But so even today, so history is that. So history, both of them say we have our accession, and Kashmiri narrative I'll come back to later. But the point is to keep in mind there's a deep cartographic anxiety both amongst Indians and Pakistanis. When I say Indians and Pakistanis, I mean the state and the nationalists. Not all Indians, not all Pakistanis. Now this is the official map of India, and you can see that in this official map, this is gone. So that's the Pakistani control. And they should also gone is here, which is Chinese control. Now, the thing is, there's a law which is very clear in India, which I'll read. Whoever publishes a map of India which is not in conformity with maps of India published by our government, they shall be punishable with imprisonment which may extend to 6 months or with fine or with both. If you have an Economist magazine, any academic book which has the real map of India, which is around this, right, which would say at best it's Indian control, Pakistan control, it will become illegal. So not only Indian publishers cannot publish it, even foreign publishers, including Economists, suffer that a lot from time to time, right? you have a situation where they get stuck because they have to follow the Indian thing. So Indian government clearly uses a cartographic lie as law. Because it's not real. India has never controlled those parts. Now India claims that's fine. So one could present it as a claim by India, right? No, that's not acceptable. So lie and fabrication of the boundary lies at the heart of Indian nationalism. Now in case of Pakistan, of course, this is the realistic map of Pakistan based on what it is, and this is the ideal map of Pakistan which includes Jammu and Kashmir. So again, the idea is there's a difference between reality and what they actually, reality and their ideal. But both states punish any dissent from the ideal or the dream that they have. So you have situation where international magazines, apart from the Indians and others, they get let's say punished. But you also have in Pakistan where, let's say Pakistan historian showed Gilgit as part of undivided Kashmir, it becomes a problem. So idea is anyone who doesn't conform to what the states want gets punished. So you can see dissent is not easy. Now, a common way to look at Kashmir is also, apart from India, Pakistan, it's about Hindu versus Muslims. Kashmir Muslim majority, Muslim and Hindu minority, and therefore that's the struggle. But the fact of the matter is, going back to the movie and Maqbool Bhatt, and remember, Maqbool Bhatt is not the only one. There are others, but he's a good example. That there are different versions in Kashmir. You ask now how many people would want what. The best thing is to give them right to self-determination and make them choose. Exactly. The point is that's a right that has never been given and will not be given till these states don't change. So the idea is, so Maqbool Bhatt's ideology is very clearly about, you could see, India and Pakistan. His mother said India and Pakistan both have punished him because he was saying we want independence from both. So you have people in Jammu and Kashmir, not necessarily Kashmiri, Jammu and Kashmir, who support India. They're largely, but not exclusively, Hindus and Buddhists of Jammu and Ladakh, particular regions. You have got Kashmiris, which is already Pakistan controlled side, occupied side, and also in the valley who support Pakistan. And then you have got a significant number who, if given an option, would choose independence from both. Now, things have evolved. So maybe in 1990, if there was a referendum, Pakistan may have won. If today it happens, again, we are guessing, it's a guess game. But my sense is that independence would be the strongest option. But these are debates that Kashmiris need to have. The problem is they have never been given that space to have that debate. Right? But that's it. Now, so there's conflict there. So as India claims Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part, and any violence or resistance to India that is a proxy war of Pakistan, and resistance is due to few Kashmiri Muslims opposing India. And democracy is interesting because, and I was giving a talk in the morning, I was mentioning this, that democracy is normally where we use democracy against the state all the time, right? So we use democracy to say, look, protect our rights. How dare you interfere in our internal affairs? It's democracy. So democracy is always used by people against the state. In case of Kashmir and India, right, democracy is used by the Indian state to prevent any criticism of what it does, human rights abuse and denial of self-determination in Kashmir. So if you criticize India, they say, but we are a democracy. We are the world's largest democracy. And then you have got, what's his name, Obama, and then you got Putin. Putin doesn't say democracy, right? But it is Obama and Cameron and all other leaders say, oh, India is a great democracy. Well, I'll talk of Indian democracy later, but let's put it, this is that it's a very deeply problematic democracy. But the fact is, in the beginning, even if we accept, and it's a very problematic one, instrument of accession was deeply divided, it was contested. But even if we accept, that okay, Kashmiri ruler, who was actually minority, signed with India, let's accept that, even then you have to keep in mind that India did promise a plebiscite. Both India and Pakistan went to the UN and promised plebiscite where it's the people of Jammu and Kashmir who will choose. So far so good. Then over 6 months, both India and Pakistan agree to make it very clear that self-determination option is about choosing between India and Pakistan. So from aspiration of people, they make it clear India and Pakistan. And this is a very sleight of game where both states fight, but they make sure that the independent option is not there. Right? Now, you have got Pakistan, of course. According to Pakistan, it's an unfinished story of partition, Muslim majority, therefore they should be part of Pakistan. It's conveniently ignored that what becomes Bangladesh, East Pakistan was also Muslim majority, but well, Pakistan had to accept its independence, but they'll ignore it. Thus, it's a jugular vein. Now, very interestingly, all these countries, both countries, always use body language of body. So for India, it's the crown of the head. So if you look at India, it's the crown. So can you really chop off the head? If you chop off the head, then entire thing collapses. For Pakistan, also jugular vein is here, you know. So very interesting where nation states use body language to prevent any right to self-determination. And body, so the language of body to deny human rights. And now Pakistan is generally better and cleverer in how it handles Kashmir issue, because at least it pays lip service to self-determination. It will talk of self-determination. It will talk of UN resolution. Now UN resolution is India-Pakistan. Now the problem with even Pakistan's position is, in a sense, Pakistan has what's called Azad Kashmir, so free Kashmir. Now, so they could have experimented, if they were genuine, to allow pro-Pakistan but also pro-independence people to have equal say in everything. The problem is that thing doesn't exist. So constitutionally, the interim constitution that binds Pakistan-controlled Kashmir with Pakistan makes it very clear that the elected leaders have to work towards accession with Pakistan. Right? So only thing that makes Pakistan better than India, and it is better, is the horrible state and horrible conduct of India. And it is better because at least it's not killing the way India kills. Now one could argue that it doesn't kill the way India kills because people haven't fought or resisted way they did against India. But that's an academic question. But overall, it is India that remains primarily cruel, has blood on its hand, and denies self-determination more crudely. Now, Kashmiri narrative, as it's divided regionally, ethnically, politically, which is to be expected in any kind of conflict zone. Now, when we remind ourselves of the division, India is a clever state, you have to admit it. I mean, they have learned a lot from the British. That's why they are very colonial also, right? In Kashmir and other places. Clever because at one level, we are democracy. But everyone accepts that every government that's found in Jammu and Kashmir is dictated by Delhi. Then they say, we are democracy, we allow court systems. But courts are not allowed to, in most cases, prosecute military men. It's an odd kind of democracy. It's like Assad kind of democracy in Syria, right? Or something along those lines where civilian courts don't have jurisdiction over military men. Or military men, not military women. So I could say military men or military persons. Now, the idea is, but generally, what's common across the people, be it pro-Pakistan, pro-independence, pro-Azadi, pro-human rights, even very few pro-India, is that there's a right to self-determination. The idea is, let people decide once and for all. Right? And therefore, the demand for Azadi, which crudely or very not so crudely, very beautifully means freedom, is at the heart of the struggle. Is demand of freedom. Whether it's freedom from India only to join Pakistan, freedom from both India and Pakistan, or freedom within India, within Pakistan, comes later. But the idea, it is very much about freedom. And it is very much about human rights. That we have to keep in mind, right? Now, India, I said it's also clever because sometimes you'll speak to Indians about freedom and Azadi, they say, yes, it's Kashmiri Muslims. But what about? Now, they always come, what about Kashmiri Pandits, Kashmiri Hindu minority who were expelled? There are a lot of it from the valley. So, they were there. And the argument is that there was a genocide against them, that it's not killing, the 280 plus Kashmiri Pandits were killed, but most of them were exiled. There's an exodus. Then what about Pandits? What about Hindus? Now, it's a valid question. One cannot talk of a movement of self-determination by ignoring minorities. There's no doubt, right? The problem with this argument is, if you bring in minorities to talk of human rights of all and self-determination of all, it's ethical. But if you bring in minorities only to justify the brutalization of majority, which is what Indians do, then I think it's highly unethical. And that's what Indians do. They have been, again, good followers of British, more clever than British, British divided and ruled, and then quit. Indians are dividing and ruling. There's no idea of quitting at this stage. Now, why do India and Pakistan struggle over this? Very clearly, it's about geopolitics. Specific Pakistan is a large, significant size of territory. It's about territoriality. But to be honest, India doesn't really gain from territory of Kashmir. It has a lot already. It's a big state and they have difficulty managing this. But it's about nationalism. Remember, we are dealing with post-colonial states that are neurotic and paranoid about any change to the boundary. So that is why it's about nationalism. It's about religion to an extent. It's about resources, water resources. And that's why for Pakistan it becomes very important. Well, water resources in Pakistan come via Kashmir. So hypothetically, even if Kashmir was independent, let's say of both India and Pakistan, you could see that Kashmiris asserting that independence of the resources is going to harm Pakistan most. That's one of the reasons why they would not want an independent Jammu and Kashmir. Right? And this is what I talked in the morning, but I'll shorten it for you. The way I see it and present it is that what we witness in Kashmir is full-blown colonization by post-colonial states. But it's colonization. Colonization because it involves asymmetric relations of power of one people over another, which is justified by talking of civilization, of democracy, of bringing progress, of providing the money. And the Indian, as you know, imperialists can be right-wing and left-wing both. Right? You see Putin or Mao or whatever, right-wing, left-wing both. And imperialists can be liberal and illiberal both. So the liberal imperialists in India would argue that, look, Kashmiris, yes, something has gone wrong there. We have to help them out. But look, they're wearing jeans. Someone had written an article. A famous writer wrote an article saying that Kashmiris he met, young people, wanted to go to KFC, wanted a pizza and they're wearing jeans. Jeans. I don't know what's with jeans. I'm not wearing it. Maybe others are. But something to do with jeans. So the idea was they want modern life like us, which is fine. Maybe they do. I'm sure they like KFC chicken, some of them. But the idea is, how does that justify brutalization? For them, liberal imperialists, it does. The idea is, we provide them progress. Now, there is no KFC in Kashmir. So they have not even provided KFC. Territorial control is there, very clear. That's there a part of colonization. You have got vocabulary of expression, how control is presented. Remember, colonialists never call themselves colonialists. Isn't it? So, fascists sometimes call them fascists, so let's not talk of them. But they will talk of always progress, control, and all of this. Economic exploitation is there, you have got cultural subservience, racialization, seeing them as very different, militarization, social transformation. All these factors are colonization. And when we look at Kashmir, it's very clear. You had Nehru promising in Kashmir, we will give self-determination, plebiscite. And you have a situation today when, if there's an election, and this particular last election, 71% approximately voted, there's a vote, then Indians argue, Indian media also, that that's against militancy. That's against freedom, that's against everything. The point is, not a single Kashmiri party that's pro-India, you have to be pro-India too, right, to fight the election. Not a single Kashmiri party goes and says, we are pro-India and give us vote because we are pro-India. They always say it's about bread and butter issue, roads. Kashmir dispute is an international dispute that will be resolved later. But so Kashmiri party would get vote, always emphasize it's not about dispute, it's about daily livelihood issue. But Indian media and Indian government always presents as end of the matter. You have had elections, so why the need for plebiscite? You have got political territorial control very clearly. You have got economic dependence, image from floods last year. There were massive floods last year. And until today, if I'm not mistaken, the compensation that affected families are getting is $2,005, maybe $30 or $35 per family, which is nothing. It's not a poor place. So all I'm saying, Indian government promised everything and delivered nothing. Sometimes, even if you were a good imperialist, you would actually do something for them. But it almost feels, when you look at Indian government's policy, that they want Kashmir dispute to be alive. They want violence there. You can see why they want violence alive. Violence is a good business. It's a good business that allows Indian military to remain a very important actor. It's a good business for right-wing Hindus in India to say, oh, these Kashmiri Muslims and other Muslims are all the problem. So it's a very good business. That's why they don't want the conflict to there. But there's an economic dependence. The Kashmiris who were largely self-reliant in the past or dependent on what becomes part of Pakistan control are today completely dependent on India. So first you make them dependent and then you blame them for being dependent. And then you blame them for being parasites. Now, idea is in India, a lot of electricity comes via hydropower of Jammu and Kashmir. but Kashmiris don't get anything in return or much in return. And when Kashmiris demand, the rhetoric is, oh, the thieves, they never pay for bills. Right? Now, of course, this dependent state. This image is from Kashmiris queuing and in crowd to get job with military and paramilitary. Now, most people hate military and paramilitary because they're sign symbols of occupation. But the idea is there are no jobs. The only sector open to Kashmir that's flourishing, like anything in Kashmir, is the security industry. Now, security industry is not the private one like G4 Security Corps and others. It is very much still the state one. So, Indian state is making and involving more and more Kashmiris into the state through coercive branches, because that, what it would mean is if there is any resistance in the future, it becomes a civil war between Kashmiris. So, you have one brother in army, one brother or sister or whatever in militancy, and you fight to make them fight. And that's what's happening. So in bureaucracy now more Kashmiris are being involved. It's a racialized knowledge production. I don't know how many of you watch Bollywood or have watched it, but Kashmir is always seen as beautiful, nice place, or increasingly as hostile, bad people, right? But it's always about that Indian female actors, so they can't find a Kashmiri actor, female, so they get an Indian family, and she breaks the stereotype. Now, all these, when you start reading and you realize how 1930s Hollywood it sounds. I can't explain, but that's what I'm working on, how 1930s Hollywood. The bad one, not the good to Hollywood, no. But last year there were floods. Now, these are media reports. Now, Indian media could see how the ideas look. Kashmiris, they're saved and by military, and then they say go back. So the idea is Kashmir is thankless. Now, you have this supposed liberal newswoman. She's supposed liberal, right? Now, all this emphasizes how our boys are saving Kashmiris. I mean, the first news that came out and first footage was of a woman being lifted after 4 days from water, and mic being thrust into her mouth and saying, "Do you thank Indian government and Indian army for saving you?" That was a crude level of propaganda that Indian army indulges in, right? And then it means that from Jannat ke Fauji Farishte, it means from heaven. So these are angels. Oh, military angels. I don't know how military can be angels, but military angels from heaven, which is Kashmir in this context, right? All of them saving everything. Heroics. And these are, see, defense forces, heroics expose separatist intellectuals. So critics like us cannot be intellectuals, we have to be intellectuals, always. Right? Now, you could say democracy, rule of law. India has rule of law generally, right? But there's AFSPA and other rules. So there's a particular law called Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is an emergency law. Emergency law that was imposed in 1959, if I'm not mistaken, in Northeast India, another contest region, where it allows military and anyone associated with military to arrest and kill person without threat of prosecution. Now in Kashmir they introduced in 1990. Now this is an emergency law when you're dealing with the immense uprising. But that law never disappears. So it hasn't. We have been demands. So the idea is this law has been used by military to justify all kinds of killings. What it requires is, let's say, if you're the military person and you have been accused of killing someone, right? So normally the family, he goes and says, no, I know these are the evidence. You go to the court, imagine, generally you'll be poor, you go to the court, somehow find the evidence, the court accepts, then say, okay, there's court, now you have to be allowed to come in. Then your military, so your battalion or your regiment or your whatever brigade, they have to give permission for you, and they don't give permission. So therefore, to prosecute, you need permission from Delhi, you need permission from Ministry of Home Affairs or Defense Ministry, right? Until today, from 1990 until today, zero permission has been granted. So you could struggle for 10, 15 years to reach up to a point where there's clear evidence against her, right, for killing, murdering, whatever. But until unless you get permission, she cannot be prosecuted, and not a single prosecution has taken place. Right? So that's what. So law, therefore, is not to protect the people from the state, but in this case to protect the state from the people. And that's why I said colonial. Example, you could see similar image, terrorist attack, 2 soldiers killed, 2 injured, 4 civilians injured in army firing. And you wonder how come same newspaper, same image, same time actually gives the truth. Because first, if there's a death, they assume it's terrorists being killed, or terrorist attack and whatever, soldier killed. Within 10-15 minutes, they realized that actually army had shot 2 to 3 men and killed them. Because the car had, first their version was, the car refused to stop for check. So therefore they felt that they are killers, or they're terrorists. But the idea was the car had skidded. It was an icy condition. It had skidded and hit a tree. So soldiers fired at the car. Now, but I'm just giving an example where even the Indian military sometimes, and Indian military spokespersons sound more sane than Indian media. And which is rare feat, by the way. Right? Any military spokesperson, you'd know how awful they would be, but Indian media is much worse than that. Right? There's heavy militarism. Without going, we can expand that in question answer, but there's heavy militarism everywhere. These are helmets I found over somewhere, and I took pictures and then it disappeared later. Right? It's a police state, very much every aspect of life is controlled, aspect of life, right? Violence is integral, and it's violence at everyday level of every kind. Against is gender-based violence, you have got sexual violence, you have got brutalization, you have got bullying, you have got murder, you have got rape, you have got every kind of violence you can think of, it exists there at larger scale. Right? See, there's some examples. This is from pellet injury, which is supposed to be non-lethal. Right? So you have got situation where, okay, there are 80,000, and I say, okay, as if it's easy, but let's say up to 80,000 people have been killed. You have got disappeared people. You've got victims of torture that live. Then you have got those who get injured from time to time, those who are blinded. So Indian state in Kashmir is one that kills, that brutalizes, that tortures, that blinds, that controls over every aspect of body. Right? They can't control the mind, so they try to control the body at least, right? Your situation, of course, this is from a particular village in 1991, where between 40 to 80 women, and because there's no agreement over the number, women were raped one night by an entire battalion. Now, the Indian government had an investigation within few days without going there, without going to the village, without speaking to a single woman. They came up with a report that is a conspiracy to malign the good image of Indian army. Right? That's democracy for you. Right? So they have been struggling for justice. Not a single person has been prosecuted so far. You got therefore rape and sexuality. We can expand that later. You got enforced disappearance. Again, there are vigils, and keep in mind, people resist. It's not that India is brutal and therefore everyone keeps quiet. People keep resisting. And part of it is that killing is a reflection of people resisting. Right? But something which I think is unique, any occupation, be it in Balochistan, Kurdistan, or Tibet, or in East Turkestan, and many other places, has all kinds of brutalities, right? There's no doubt. But something which is also here, which I don't know whether it exists elsewhere or not, that control over the body. So, what Indian rule in occupation in Kashmir is not only about control over living bodies and the right to take away the life, but it's also control over dead bodies. So, in this case, Maqbul Bhatt, the good example from 1984, Indian government has not given the body back, and it's not only because he's symbol, that is a factor. Afzal Guru, who was hanged in 2013, on February 9, 2013, he was not actually a symbol of the nation. Even his body wasn't given back. So the main reason why bodies are not given back is because India believes it can do it. Why it believes it can do it goes back to international community. Because the image of democracy is so strong, and the idea of rising India, shining India, and whatever India is so strong that no foreign power is going to question India. Right? So the idea therefore is India can have a colonization over the living, but also an attempted colonization over the dead. In this case also, imagine, in this particular case, the person was hanged. Now even the Supreme Court said that there is no clear evidence, but he should be hanged because collective conscience of the nation demands it. Collective conscience. A very interesting phenomenon. It's a collective conscience that justifies a killing. Right? It happens. And when they had to hang him, what they did, the wife wasn't informed. They sent a letter by speed post. Speed post is like DHL kind of thing, except it takes 3 days. Not even. And they didn't bother to call. So, just simple phone call, someone going, that didn't happen. So she found out that her husband was hanged through media later rather than the government having courtesy. Again, why would any state do it? They would do it because in the end they can get away with it, because it reflects the nature of the state, and the nature of the state is a cruel, authoritarian, colonial state while having the facade of democracy. Right? Now, resistance, of course, we have all kinds of resistance, we can talk of that, but people protest all the time, there's demand for Azadi. But Parmeena Angar, again, old image, but people struggle. This image, I got it from internet, so I don't know. Some image I took it, but This one, you have heavy police presence and a man who's seen as a madman dancing. So, and I like this image because to an extent it reminds you that one has to be mad and insane to resist this level of militarization, which is heaviest in the world, by the way. Right? You know, have you been to Tel Aviv airport? If you go, you could see the kind of scrutiny. It's as bad, if not worse here, because I've experienced both. Right? Now, in this case, you have to be insane enough, and yet what you find are people insane enough to keep resisting the occupation, keep resisting the rule, and keep resisting the narrative about Kashmir that Indian media, Indian nationalists, Indian commentators, and Indian state promotes, which is everything is fine except what is Pakistan's fault. Finally, Pakistan and colonization, of course, we can expand that in question answer, Talat and me. Let's leave it, but there's something somewhat similar, not completely. Police state. Now, last fantasy, I thought I could end up with fantasy, right? Is that what's the option and everything? Keep in mind that this is a region that was a zone of contact. Now, whenever Kashmiri friends ask me what's the hope, where do we get hope from, there is no hope from current state systems or current states. States have to collapse in order to either transform completely or collapse. Now, I always say to Indians that if you believe in Indian government or if you believe in state of India, then the onus is on you to prevent. So, the onus is on you to be humane and not allow for brutalization in your name. But broadly speaking, demilitarization shouldn't be that difficult. It's crucial. This is where international community can play a role in pursuing genuine democratization. Both sides have problem. Respect for human rights, all these are nice. They should happen in any case. A right to self-determination. Now, for me, the argument is very clear. Democracy essentially also involves right to self-determination for people. So it has to be part and parcel of genuine democratization. And the crucial factor is that the narrative around Kashmir has to shift from focus on India, Pakistan, whatever, right? To both cruel states similarly and majoritarian states. Shift from India, Pakistan to people, including those living the border, those living there. I think therefore we have to shift from obsessing about territorial conflict between two existing nation states to imagine that why do we think only in nation state terms? Why can't we think of third nation state, or why can't we think beyond nation state? So in the end, the only ethical solution for the region can be Azadi. Thank you very much. Any question, comment? Talat and I both can answer together.
I have a question maybe to both of you.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for a good lecture. As you may know, China is building, is busy with the Silk Road project through Kashmir into even to another problem region, Balochistan. How is it perceived by the Kashmiris and by the Kashmiri political activists and organization parties and so on? And how does it affect the Kashmiri struggle for independence?
I end up answering a lot, so I want him to start always.
Well, the thing is, that's going to change the demographic changings deeply if you go back to Gilgit. So Gilgit is up there, and there's a Silk Route. It's going through from East Turkestan, occupied East Turkestan from Xinjiang, what the Chinese call, through Pakistan, through Gilgit, through Pakistan whole to Balochistan to connect motorways and railway track, so they can they can reach the Middle East very easily. So but what's happened, and if it's a development means new roads and tracks, that's mean develop. Yes, we develop. But what's the background? The Chinese going to build, the Chinese workers, and Chinese transport going to go through the Silk Route to Pakistan and the Middle East. Texts go to Pakistan. And not only that, roads actually going to change, demographic change. There's a lot of dams in Gilgit. China is on the way to put the money. It's $40 billion. $40 billion is a huge amount of money, and that's going to be implemented in the next 5 years. And yeah,
No, I mean, I'll talk of two things. One is Balochistan is an interesting case because you asked what do Kashmiri generally, let's say, intellectuals or political activists and others think. One is, remember, when you are living in an occupied territory, enemy of an enemy is seen as a friend, right? Then often what happens is, which is this, and Kashmir are not unique. So what happens is there's a reluctance to, I'm talking the Indian occupied side, there's a reluctance to criticize Pakistan because Pakistan has supported Kashmiri struggle for self-determination, at least in the Indian occupied side, right? There's a reluctance to criticize. Something similar to what Tibetans. Now Tibetans would not criticize India because India has given refuge to Dalai Lama and Tibetans. But therefore, whenever one talks of Balochistan, one, there's an ignorance. Second, the reaction of the pro-Pakistanis is that, oh, but that's a conspiracy of outsiders. So Kashmiri struggle is seen as a genuine struggle and Baloch struggle is seen as a conspiracy of all outsiders to malign Pakistan. Something similar to what Indian nationalists say. So there's generally a lack of awareness, or second, a lack of empathy for Baloch, for instance. Now regarding these things, and some mutual also, because I've got Baloch friend who would always think that Kashmiris are pampered and Baloch are suffering more. So there's often a competition over who's suffering more, when the reality is all of them are suffering. And that's how states play the game. Now the Silk Route, and of course as Khaled pointed out, it will bring about big changes. Now again, in today's context in India, in Indian occupied Kashmir, you also get news of ISIS flags. So Indian news media would always emphasize on Pakistan flag and ISIS flag. Now Pakistan flag was always there. There's nothing new. So I don't understand why obsession of showing it. Because there's a propaganda war going on between India and Pakistan for especially last 1 year. So the talks are collapsing. The propaganda war from Indian side is to portray Kashmiri struggle and protest as completely about Pakistan or ISIS. Now these are 5-6 kids, masked, who always bring up ISIS flag. And one wonders that a state that can kill so many people and can put everyone under surveillance, they know that these same guys on Friday around same time go up to a building and unfurl the flag and they don't get caught. So you start wondering what is really going on. Now ISIS thing is very clear that if today Israel supports Kashmiri struggle against India, most Kashmiris start supporting Israel. Simply because they are anti-India. See, that's the idea. Kashmiris and the Indian have been brutalized so much that anyone who supports or opposes India becomes seen as someone worthy. So in this context, even China is seen as a benign power. And a lot of Kashmiris in the valley face this dilemma. I'm talking of the leaders, that they want to talk of entire Jammu and Kashmir, but their perspective is often limited to the valley. So they would not talk of Gilgit-Baltistan, they will not talk of Azad Kashmir, they will not talk of Ladakh, but they'll claim all of it. So it's a very divided discourse, but in general, most of them would, if Pakistan government supports, they'll support it, but without having a serious discussion of what impact it may have over the conflict in the long term. Because many of them, they're dealing with day-to-day indignity of living, indignity of living under Indian occupation. So for them, anyone who's against India becomes a friend.
One related question. There have been reports about China expanding military presence in the Indian-controlled Kashmir, and India hasn't reacted very strongly against this.
You mean the borders? You're talking about the Gilgit, because there are
no, not Gilgit. No,
the border,
exactly that part.
The border. I mean, it's always there. The Chinese are, encroaching in,
all the time, steadily.
Yeah.
And India is not reacting. I mean,
Look, this is the ideal map of Jammu and Kashmir, right? So this is the Chinese control, Pakistan control, Indian control. Now this part, there's a border dispute between India and China, and that's in fact my research. I'm working on that separately in any case. Now this was actually never controlled by India, nor was it controlled by China. It was what would be seen as East Turkestan, Xinjiang, Tibet. It was that region. The reason it became disputed is because the British map makers would shift the lines, because British would make a map like this, would make a map like that, because they were only making maps. Right? I mean, at that point in time, they didn't have to control. So the problem India faced is they inherited that map and they chose the most expansionist map on the understanding that they'll negotiate with China over it. But the negotiation never happened. So now what we have is, this is effective Chinese control throughout. And there's another part that's Indian control that China claims. In this context, you have a situation where even the lines, we are talking of, remember, territory that is 6,000 meters high, 4,000 meters high. And only military exists, or Tibetans exist occasionally, and yak. Nothing else can exist there, right? So what's happening is a lot of news about Chinese incursion is exaggerated news report in Indian media, and this is why you find Indian military saying they're making mountain out of whatever. What is the mountain out of?
Molehill.
Molehill, right? So they're doing that rather than it being real. But there are disputes because China in the end wants India to be always, in a sense, on tenterhooks. And part of the reason why China is interested in the region is partly to get access to relevancy, but it's also to help Pakistan, because having Pakistan on its side helps China to make sure that in Asia there's only one big power, which is uncontested, that's China. In 50s you had both China and India, you see. So the border dispute is a tool through which they keep India always neurotic.
Surround India.
Yes, around India. So that's one of the accusations. But remember, China thinks that US is surrounding it. India thinks that China is surrounding it. And I'm sure Americans think that everyone surrounds them. I don't know what it is. But anyway, that's the idea, and surveillance is always there. Anyway, sorry, next, there was you.
I think
Oh, you. Oh.
Okay. I come from India, and I never heard about these things.
Could you please speak up?
Okay. Actually, what we heard, and today also I read news that there are some problems going on in Jammu Kashmir. There is some problems, mostly the Islamic problems. The Islams are fighting, and that's why Indian military is doing these things. And we never know these things. That's Indian military is killing people in Jammu Kashmir. So I'm wondering, like, why don't the leaders from Jammu and Kashmir, they don't come to like other parts of India? Like Indian government is doing it, but not Indians. So if they try to convey these messages to other parts of India, then they could get some support. And actually, I never heard these things, and I'm hearing these things in Sweden. So
I think whole part of the world and I look towards the military have always supported Jammu Kashmir because I'm come from India, okay, and I worked with Nestle before, and my territory was Jammu Kashmir, supplying foods and products, and my distributor belongs to Jammu and Kashmir. So we had a very good relations with people there and military and day-to-day things, and I have seen they have an identity. And yeah, there was issues with the Islamic population there because there are illegal immigration from Pakistan borders, and my base is Punjab, so I know borders as well.
Okay, and is it connected?
Yeah.
Because we can answer all of
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Okay.
it's connected. I mean, I would say I also come from India and I've stayed in Delhi all my life. And you do hear these things, but people who want to hear it. And I mean, I've also been in a lot of protests against the Afzal Guru killing. And I mean, like I said, if you want to see it, you will see it. And I don't think that even within my circles, there were a lot of people who were still against Kashmir, even knowing all the facts. So I mean, there are a lot of documentaries made, there are a lot of talks happening all the time. So I mean,
Is it connected or?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
every minute has been interesting, but I hope we will get to Tibet.
The top. I can always go to top of Tibet endlessly. That's my.
I'm worried that it may end at 6.
Okay. Now, it's an interesting part of.
Can I just,
okay.
could you please repeat the questions?
Yeah, I'll
so
do
we
that.
hear
Yeah.
it again. Yeah.
So basically, one question was related to one was related to how a lot of Indians who normally not like violence of this kind to go on in their name haven't heard of it. So the question was, why do Kashmiri leaders and Kashmiri activists not go and make Indians aware of what's going on? The second one was about how there is problem usually seen in terms of Muslims, right? So there's something specific about that. And the third was that actually no, there are a lot of documentaries made, protests done by Indians and Kashmiris both. So it depends upon who you speak to. Now the question is, look, I mean, I didn't have internet, I could show. Now normally like this kind of talk we could have in India, it's a democracy, you could talk and people will become aware. Let me give my own example. I'm not Kashmir, so it's easier for me to speak of those things, right? And I come from England, which protects me in certain sense. My livelihood doesn't depend on India. Last year, early this year, there's IIT Bombay, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, very prestigious institution.
Mumbai.
Mumbai. And then you've got TIS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai again, right? So two very prestigious institutions. In both places, I gave a talk on Kashmir. 2 minutes before the talk, the venue was cancelled. Students protested. So we went, and it was radical students who had invited me, communist and radical students. We went and I had talk. The director came and abused the organizer. I could overhear. Then later we went to IIT. Again something similar happened. Now these are academic venues where during the talk someone tried to throw a chair at me. Right? And we're talking academic institution. Later it came out in newspaper saying no about these things. So I'm giving an example of how in India it's not that, forget Kashmir, even someone like me who's an academic, in academic environment, in the past I could talk on anything. Not only Tibet. Tibet, of course, I would be loved if I talk of Tibet there, right? And I do. But Hindu nationalism, Kashmir, I could speak without any problem and would get invited to speak until 2 years ago. Thanks to the new government, thanks to being sarcastic, of course, thanks to this new government, most academic institutions are very fearful of organizing anything on these lines because they don't want to cross the line. But students are protesting. So you have a lot of Indians also supporting it. But part of it is, remember, I mean, if one lives in a colonial nation state, including the British would have had the same thing, you don't realize what's happening in your name. And then you buy into the narrative, it must be the Muslims, it must be the Sikhs, it must be someone else creating problem. How could our boys do it? The fact of the matter is, much of the violence can be committed by me, can be committed by my father, my mother, or whatever. And that is something to understand. Now, there's a lot of propaganda. I gave you examples of Indian media. Now, Kashmiris, when they come to Delhi to speak, they're excluded, they're shouted at. And non-Kashmir, like we get stopped, and I'm telling you, we get stopped, including, don't be surprised, we get banned from Kashmir and banned from India from speaking, something on this line. Now, all of the things I spoke about, except let's say breakup of the state, all of the things I talk is part of democracy, isn't it? Any good democracy should not have dehumanization. The challenge is, even when you use, and I've used only Indian democracy and the idea of democracy and constitution to talk of human rights, and you get accused that, oh, you are siding with Muslims. So you have a problem of Islamophobia, and you have a problem of colonial mentality that would want Indians, like you, not to know. And if you know, then to buy into the narrative that army men are heroes. Now remember, not all army men are evil. I'm sure they're not evil, right? Most of them. They are doing their job because most of them are also from poor family. But but all colonization have functioned through that. But in the end, I do believe that one aspect of I'm speaking a lot, but an important thing to notice is that you cannot have an anti-colonial struggle without solidarity with outsiders, including Indians. And Kashmiris are seeking that, but you also have to remember they'll be skeptical. And you can see why. Because Indians like me can always go and talk nice things, I become hero, and then I can sell them out. I don't. But a lot of times they have done that. Indians have said, if only you become secular, we'll support you. Oh, if only you criticize Pakistan, we'll support you. If only you stop eating beef, we'll support you. I say eating beef because that's the news now. Yesterday, for the first time in the assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, a Kashmiri MP was thrashed by a right-wing Hindu MP because that Kashmiri MP had said, I eat beef and that's my right to eat beef. Now, the beef, there's no rule of banning beef consumption in India. Beef consumption is allowed. Beef sale is not allowed. Right? So now, the Hindu argument, Hindu nationalist argument is that you should not eat beef because it affects the majority sentiment. Fine. Now, Jammu Kashmir is Muslim majority, but now the argument is no, you're part of India, therefore you also have to follow what we say. This is the kind of state we're dealing with. I'm sorry, a very long answer. Next, you should speak next. Anyway, please.
Yeah, well, you already have some.
No, there was a question from her and then...
No, that's you're done.
Okay. Yeah.
When you talked, you gave 3 different alternatives of the future. That Kashmir either would be more Pakistan, more Indian, or rule themselves. How realistic? Which alternative would you think would be the most realistic? And could there be a fourth, that which is a status quo question?
Well, in the Kashmiri narrative, status quo, what's going on in last since 1947. That's not acceptable. That is the bottom line. For India and Pakistan, they are settled, almost settled. India and the control line that they have, they want to make international border. So that's what they plan all the time. But that's we, Kashmiris, from both sides. So we are not satisfied. We want reunification. We have divided families for the last 60, 70 years. So in our way, it's like, that's the only practical way. Because one side is 180 million Muslims, other side is 1100 million Indians. This is a matter of become an ego. And what we want to see is more easy, more practical is to it both leave, because either India or Pakistan cannot accept others' victory. Pakistan cannot take rest of Kashmir, India cannot take Pakistan inside Kashmir, that's reality. So where's the solution? So in our solution, I mean, it's like they both have to leave, that's a simple, easiest solution. And the cost for India and Pakistan is 30-40% of budget what they're putting for defense for Kashmir. And they can make that money into make a hospital, road, whatever they want to. I don't know. So that's, yeah. Yeah.
I have a habit of cutting down people. No, it's not about cutting down. I will start thinking sooner. In terms of course, the easiest option and likely option is status quo. Because
what I've heard this evening, it's a lot of frontier issues. There are religious issues and things like that, but there is nothing explosive in it.
Yeah. So in fact,
so that's why I brought up the fourth issue of status quo.
No.
Because I think India could live with that and Pakistan could live with that. The only ones that can't live with that would be Kashmir.
Yeah, that is the reality. So status quo is something that's oppressive for the people affected directly. It's lucrative for vested interest, bureaucratic military interest in Pakistan as well as in India, right? So that's why it's likely that nothing is going to change unless situation from international community, which is unlikely to change, or second is there's another uprising in Kashmir. Now the point is that is the only way in which cost can be raised up, where India and Pakistan will have to sit together and talk. Now what India does cleverly is whenever there's an uprising, and there was uprising even in 2010, not violent uprising, these are all non-violent ones, right? Now when you had 126 or 125 Kashmiri young boys and young men killed, not a single police or not a single military man killed, right? 126. International media was quiet, right? Now even then, Indian government said, oh, we need to have negotiation and we need to talk to Kashmiris because it was becoming excessive. And then they quietened down and then the Indian government went back to business as usual. So it's likely. But the question which I think his movie is trying to do, or the movie is trying to do, or what we are trying to inform is that if, let's say Indians, and that's where Indians and Pakistan, if Indians are happy with their conscience, where it allows for this level of brutalization and lack of justice to carry on simply because there's not violence enough, then it says something about the nature of Indian state and Indian nationalism, and that has to be questioned. So in a sense, I think purpose of these endeavors, movie or talk, is partly idealistic, right, to remind us that we are human beings and Kashmir is human beings and what status is not acceptable. But you never know. I mean, look, empires collapse. Empires collapse out of blue. Soviet Union collapsed. Who knows? Indian Empire, Chinese Empire, when Tibet also, hopefully free Tibet will be there, but hopefully Pakistan Empire, these will not collapse. Because the change will come within India, within China for sure. 50 years, 100 years, we don't know. But the only thing we can hope for is, while that opportune movement comes, at least people like them, Kashmiris, or people like us who express solidarity because we believe in human rights and we believe in humanity, at least we should make sure that the issue is not forgotten internationally, but also nationally within India. So that's what we can hope for.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm standing and being loud because some people...
Did I understand it right, that the most realistic way to work is to work on the Indian opinion?
That's my personal view is that no anti-colonial movement can afford to have one strategy.
Yeah.
See, but working on Indian opinion, you also point out, is very crucial. Because I'm sure there would be Indians who would not accept what's going on.
No.
Yes, it is crucial.
Like this
Yes.
young man
Yes.
said that he wasn't completely
Yes.
aware of the conflicts in Kashmir.
Yeah. There was one question there. Oh, it's a question then.
Thank you. Am I correct to claim that if India gives or accepts independence of the Kashmir,
Yeah.
it won't collapse or it won't disintegrate? But if Pakistan accepts free and independent Kashmir, then Pakistan will collapse and there won't be any Pakistan.
First, you want to answer? No. Okay. Now, in this case, now remember, it's like we are dealing with nation states that are paranoid, neurotic. Now, I have nothing against neurosis or paranoia. I'm just talking of it in state terms, right? Now, something small is a small place. India can afford not to have Jammu and Kashmir. Well, any state can afford not to have anything, right? But they'll not give up because it involves the idea of nation state. And the idea of India as imagined in last 100 years includes Jammu and Kashmir without the concept of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, in case of Pakistan, the thing is, you have to also, Balochistan is bigger for Pakistan. Anyway, Pakistan is living without Indian occupied Kashmir, isn't it? So it can survive. The problem is the Punjabi dominance of Pakistan, because Pakistan in the end is nothing but dominance of one particular ethnic group, Punjabis. Now, and that's what had cost them Bangladesh, East Pakistan, right? Punjabi dominance on its own also needs territories to flourish, and Balochistan is more crucial. The Kashmir that they have is also important, but they can't afford to give up. But to be honest, I mean, most states in Europe, you look at the size of them, I'm sure they're small states, they can survive. I'm sure Punjab on its own, forget India or Pakistan. Punjab, if they had united, India and Pakistan, Punjab, they could be one of the strongest states possible in the world. So therefore, it's not about pragmatism, it's more about vested interest. So going back to Pakistan military, how can Pakistan military justify the bloated budget it has? Only by saying civilians are useless, they will sell us out. Kashmir is an important issue which only we can protect. Islam is in danger, only we can protect, while working with the US and China. Which is interesting, protection of Islam but working with the US and China. So we are talking therefore vested bureaucratic interest, and something similar in India is there. Not to the same extent, but Indian military is weak in Delhi, Bombay. I mean, normally in Delhi, Bombay, they're not going to do something to you. But in Kashmir, if you just walk on the street and you see a military person, if they see you as Kashmiri and if they see you as Indian or foreigner, right, the behavior is completely different. Because that's how they behave. We had some, I don't know, how did Tibet, where did Tibet come from? Sorry.
As I understood the announcement of the lecture, there would be a focus on Tibet and
Also.
the issue of human rights in Tibet, relationship between Tibet and China. Is that a misunderstanding?
Yeah, misunderstanding.
Well, I can talk of those things if you want. You can just ask me a question. I can
invite you back.
Yeah, but Tibet is my main focus of research in any case. But just ask me a question, I can expand. Others might be, it would be good for them to be
Okay, I'll
enlightened.
tell you. My wife and I are
Yeah.
academics.
Yeah.
We're giving a PhD course in Shanghai at the end of October, and we're going to be dealing with graduate students mainly from China. My wife is a specialist in linguistic human rights, has written about the Kurds, has written about the Tibetans, about the Uyghurs. How far in a university in Shanghai can one talk openly about minority rights, about language rights, about the relationship between China and its various provinces?
If I'm going
About genocide?
yeah.
And
No,
so-
please. Now you're crossing the line there. You know?
But those are the type of things
I know.
that I've written books
Nothing
about.
is-
That's why they invite me. So how can I talk about everything that they want to hear without harming our hosts?
Now, the way to do now, I had a talk in the morning today where that I talked of China, India, and Pakistan. That's where Tibet would have come up. It was in the morning, political side. But to summarize briefly, you're talking to someone who's not allowed into China since 2012. So I'm not the best example for you. But I was also someone who often talked of Chinese colonization, Chinese everything explicitly. I was allowed to travel. When I say allowed, it always means I had 3 different minders with me all the time in Tibet. But that's fine, at least I could manage. because I was working on the Chinese representation of Tibet. So it was good to be with the government because at least that way it was ethnographic, isn't it? Now, crossing the line for me was when I hosted the Dalai Lama at my university in London. For them, it becomes too visible for any low-level bureaucrat to handle. Now, when I give talk, I talked of occupation, I talked of various things. My suggestion would be, I mean, depends on the host, Shanghai is more open place, but still don't go with Dalai Lama picture. No point trying that. But I have used Dalai Lama's picture in Shanghai and Beijing. Because they said, oh, we encourage open debate, everything. I said, fine. I said, the most supreme boss has said, talk openly, say, here's Dalai Lama's picture. Who is he now? And then now, they couldn't say who he is, and then they said, it's the Dalai. I said, it's Dalai Lama. Then we had discussion. So I use what they say to use against them. But the way I thought Chinese system works is, there's also the loss of face concept, and it's very strong. If they invite you to talk on issues, talk of nationality and minority right, which is very much part of Chinese constitution, and then say to what extent Chinese are following what they say they are going to follow, so use that, and it works effectively. You'll find Chinese scholars also who may have some sympathy with what you're saying, right? Because if you say, oh, the policies about this, if China really wants to improve situation in Uyghurs or Tibetans or whoever, this is what it should do. And my lesson in your case is that I have worked on Kurds, I have worked on others, and this is how it works there, right? So now, when you say, let's say Turkey has occupied Kurdistan, Turkey brutalizes, Turkey kills, everyone understands you're also talking of Tibet, but without saying Tibet. And I have found that's an effective way in which you can work in an authoritarian system without upsetting your host. But to an extent, in the end, I also believe that, and I'm glad you asked that question, that we have to speak up. We have to speak. Therefore, you could see. Now, about Tibet, you'd know better than me, kind of thing, whether it's working or not. We hear that there's self-immolation is going on. Are they immolating themselves because of happiness? Remember, China claimed that Tibetans are happy. So are they burning themselves because they're too happy? You could use those language of the Chinese then. But it's good to push the boundary. I have noticed that in the Chinese system I'm talking about, they respect those who don't go and say, oh, China is great. No, which is what governments do, like British government is all over, fawning over Chinese now. They respect those who are speaking, but not in confrontational matter. So I would say, my advice would be to avoid confrontation, but use the Chinese rhetoric on human rights and other things to question it. By the way, this is what I am doing in India now. In the past I was more open, but now I realize I'm a more precarious situation. So I say, well, you say democracy, so what's your democracy? Is this your democracy? I hope that helps partly. But second thing is, it depends who's your host is, so sound them out and see. But I said, use other examples which everyone knows is about Tibet or Uyghurs and talk of them. They're all clever enough to understand and get the message.
I think that's good advice. One of the dimensions where there is a big similarity is the Kashmiri language has never been used in the education system in Kashmir. Mm-hmm. And what's happened in the Uyghur territory in the last decade is that from the position of the language being used all the way through the education system, school, higher education and so on, it's been reduced and effectively now is banned.
And so, for instance, in preschools, there are mostly Han Chinese teachers who don't understand a word of what the kids say, and so on.
See, there's a lot of work.
Same as in Pakistan, I mean.
Baloch,
Pashto, many other languages, they are even Punjabis actually.
So I would first.
Or if you take Kurdistan today, where a lot of people think that things have become much better. For instance, last week, what happened was that Turkish armored police, dragged a man on the streets of his hometown behind that vehicle, and they have killed more than 200 kids during the last month. And
Pakistan has done to thousands of people already the same methods. I mean, they have used the same atrocities and methods and punishment methods.
And at the same time as politicians in Brussels are sort of saying thank you to Erdogan because of these suggestions for 2 million people in camps in Turkey. So Erdogan is a great hero in Europe right now.
Well-
And this is what Erdogan.
Yeah, I know he's a
In
great
Pakistan
hero.
too. That's
Yeah,
why I'm
yeah.
giving you the Pakistan one,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
because Pakistan and Turkey have so many similarities, so many.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to summarize, I mean, what I would suggest is, regarding, please feel free to email me, we'll keep in touch. But the important thing is, look, we see different examples. I'm sure there are other parts of the world with similar examples of disappearance, torture, human rights abuses, lack of self-determination, and heroization of those who shouldn't be hero, right? And all of that, and demonization of those who shouldn't be demonized. The crucial question, I think, for all of us should be, that's how I see that, rather than seeing it happens here, look, there are more people killed here, there are more people killed here, we should also the similarities, and therefore come up with strategies where stateless people who are working on stateless nation, people working for stateless nation, people working for minorities and occupied and others, we can work together rather than competing over who is a bigger victim. I think that is crucial to end. So you can ask later, I think.
Okay. So, I think maybe we should
Yeah.
end it here. So thank you so much everybody for coming here.